Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here and welcome to the January 2017 Altenew blog hop. Today I'm going to be working with Smile More and You Are Amazing. That's what it is. And so I'm going to try a little bit of a different technique. I have been struggling with my mojo just because it's that time of year. So I decided I wanted to stamp the flowers kind of on an arch. So I'm using my T-square ruler to just mark the center and then mark 2 points on either side of my card. And then I'm just going to hand draw a circle or an arch. If you are not confident in your ability to do this, then you can use like a plate I've used before. A plate would be good. Any kind of round object you can kind of trace. Once I had that arch going on, I went ahead and started my stamping. I was going for symmetry here. I sometimes have a hard time doing floral arrangements, and I know things that are symmetrical are automatically appealing. So I started with this large flower in the center, and then I'm going to mask that to stamp the rest of my flowers. I usually only cut 1 or 2 masks when I'm doing something like this, and then I just move them around as needed. So the You Are Amazing set has these beautiful roses in it, and they come in all different sizes. I had originally, you saw me inking up the larger one, and then I realized it was too large. So I'm going to go with the medium-sized one. And then it also has other little, I'm not a flower person, folks, sorry. But they're little teeny tiny ones. They almost look like the little teeny tiny buds on like a hydrangea, except they're singles. So anyway, did all the stamping with the leaves, everything, masked everything, and now this is me removing all of the masks. I had a little bit of trouble with this one just because there's so many little petals. It started kind of tearing on me, but it's alright, it came off okay. Make sure you erase that pencil line before you do any of your copic coloring. And so when I had originally wanted to do this, I wanted to do a watercolor background. And then I realized I was stamping on Nina. And if you know me and watched any of my videos before, you know do not start over again. So I decided to do some faux watercoloring. The water brush that you see me use here is actually filled with colorless blender, and then I use some of my refills to just put down a couple of dots of the Copic ink right onto my acrylic block, and then I am like watercoloring with the colorless blender solution, and it actually worked really, really well, shockingly. So this is something else to try if you make the error that I did and don't realize what paper you're stamping on. I mean, who does that? Anyway, so all of the colors that I use will be linked below on YouTube as well as on my blog if you are hopping along. So I just kind of got, had like a scrap piece of paper that I had over to the side to kind of clean them off in between. And eventually I even stopped doing that because I had so much colorless blender flowing. It was cleaning out my marker without me even having to really do a whole ton. So I'm just picking it up and painting it down. I will tell you that at some point, and it's probably just my, my particular water brush, I haven't used it in like 100 years, it did kind of leak out on me, and that area did get a little, like the paper started pilling. So, but otherwise it worked really well, and it wasn't like too much moisture because they're alcohol based. It is evaporating almost as soon as you put it down. I did get a little bit of warping in my paper, but I just kind of heat set it, and that kind of took care of itself. So, yeah, pretty cool technique, and I would definitely do that again because they blend so well together. Copics are transparent, so if you put one color on top of another color, they are going to work together. So, yeah, just be aware when you're mixing, though, because I know some of them, like I put the yellow on top of the purple, and that could have been uncomfortable. That could have made some brown because they are complementary colors, but it actually ended up working out okay. So I wasn't being too terribly careful to make sure that I didn't bleed into my flowers. I knew doing this that I wasn't going to have a ton of control over where everything kind of went. Also, don't get too attached to the bottom of this card because I ended up getting rid of it. I apologize that this video is so long. I mean, this is like wait until your kids are napping, or better yet, send them to your mother's and pour a glass of wine long video. But I wanted to show you everything that I did from start to finish. I hate when I'm watching a video and all of a sudden something is completely different and I have no idea how they got from point A to point B. So after I did that, I did some splatters with each of the colors, and then I also did some splatters with just the colorless blender, just to kind of break things up a little bit. And then I'm going to move on to the copic coloring. I tried to pick colors that I had also used in the background. This ended up coming back to kind of shoot myself in the foot later on, but nonetheless, in the yellow I used in the background was the Y21, and so I decided I was going to go with those paler colors for this flower in particular. I'm filling the whole thing in with my lightest color, which is an E50. I usually only use this when I'm coloring skin tones, but it actually worked really well here. And then there's already guidelines kind of drawn in this flower, so I'm just using what the artist, the illustrator, already gave me. I'm not trying to fight against what's already there. That's one of the things that I always say in my videos, that you need to, when you're coloring, color with the shape of whatever object you're coloring. And with flowers, you want to go with whatever the shape of the petal is, because it's only going to enhance your card. If you try to go against the grain, it's going to look strange. So really, with my second darkest color, which wasn't even dark at all, I just went in and kind of highlighted those lines, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the Y21. This is going to be just the little bit of brightness that I do have in the flower is this Y21. And I don't know, overall, it's not a color combination that I have ever used before, and I've actually liked it pretty well, considering I have a hard time coloring with pale colors because I feel like I don't have enough contrast. And then I did struggle with that a little bit at the end. You'll see when we get there. But really, I'm just adding shading. Anytime petals are behind other petals, like this one here, it's going to be darker. Those will naturally be darker because there's something on top of it casting a shadow. And then the same thing with those lines. In order to create that texture, you want to make sure that you're, adding little shadows here and there. This Y26 is actually going to be my darkest color. And I always start with my lightest and then work out to my darkest. I usually just color with the tip of my marker because that gives the best blend, that flicking motion. That, for me, it gives the best blend, especially when I'm coloring flowers and I want to be creating some textures. And then I'll be really heavy-handed with the one in the back there in my darker color, since it is behind other petals. And I wasn't paying too much attention to what the center looked like as far as getting any real depth, but I'll come back to that. We're not just gonna leave it like this. So once I get all the way out to my darkest color, I move back through the same colors that I've already used. So from the Y26, I'll go back to the Y21, and this time I'm putting down more pigment than I did the first time. It's something that I do in particular to help conserve my highlight area, or my lightest portion. I just have a habit of, if I start with my darkest color, then the object is just going to be dark. I have apparently no self-control when it comes to applying my first color. I just go in and go really heavy-handed with it, which is better to do with your lightest color, because then if you don't like it, you aren't a fan, it's really, really easy to cover up. It's harder to cover up your darkest or your contrast color. So I'm just going through doing the same flicking motions, blending out all of those lines. Most of the time I'm just extending the lines that I had already put down so that I would have, more of that texture and more color in there. And then with the lightest color, I didn't even color all over everything again. I just really hit the areas that I needed to blend. And because they are transparent and you can build those colors, if you go over the same color again, it will get darker. So this is kind of like a twofer. It gives me a really light highlight color, and then will also still blend well. Here's what I was talking about with that contrast, because I didn't pay too much attention to the center. it didn't look like it was inset. So I just went back through and just around the center areas added the darkest color, and that helped to make it look more like the petals were rounded out. We're going to help that along even further with the center. So I'm coloring in with my lightest color, and then I'm doing short flicking motions from the outside edges in. I'm not completely covering up that lightest color because that's what's going to help give me some roundness to the center of the flower. So with each consecutive darker color, I'm adding less and less till it's really just around the edges. And then again, I'll go back through and blend all of those. And sometimes I will add little flicks of color a little higher up, so it's not just a solid line of color. And then you can tell with that darker center, it helps to make that flower look more like it's blooming out. So you can see here on the right hand side, I already have one flower colored. The reason I already have one flower colored is I used an R32 as my refill to paint with, but it mixed a ton with my violet, and so it didn't really look like R32 anymore, and I felt like that flower was too red. So it took me a ton of time to play around with the color to figure out something that I felt still kind of matched the color scheme I had going in the background, which is very Easter-like for some reason. I don't know. But so from here, you're going to see kind of just a little bit of the struggle I had to kind of make them match. But nonetheless, with these particular flowers, you want to use a very, very light hand and just the tip of your marker to add little lines of color. And then each time I'm adding the only time I'm really blending out is on these two large petals. The other ones I'm just doing lines of color. And the reason that this is because your contrast and your highlight is what gives your petal definitions. Like this is Merriam-Webster, not definitions, definition. Anyway, it's what makes them segregated from one another so that you can tell that there are different petals. So doing those little lines of color, you want to make sure that you're keeping a highlight because that's what's going to break up the flower and so you can see each one of those petals. So here I'm only doing 3 colors. It was really all I thought that I needed. And you can see it matches that background color pretty well, but it doesn't match the flower on the right at all. So now I have to play around and try to fix it. So since Copics are transparent, I just picked that R32 up, which is more of a red base, and I colored over the entire flower in the hopes that that would make it red enough. Because Copics are transparent and they do work together, a lighter color will remove a darker color. That's what helps them blend. But coloring over the entire flower with the R32 actually just took away all of the shading that I did. So I had to go back in with the darkest color. And it still wasn't red enough. So now I'm going in with an R35 and I'm doing, again, just the little lines of color, but enough that it's going to make it more red, like the one on the right. And then, again, I'm going to go back in with the R32 and blend that out. And then I ended up going back in one more time with the other colors, the more subdued, I don't know, for some reason in my head I always think like Victorian pink. I ended up going back in and blending those out again, and I finally found something that worked for me. For the little, I can't even remember what I called them, whatever, those little teeny tiny flowers, I decided that I was going to go with violets since I had used those in the background and I felt like they would match the reddish and yellow flowers I already had down really well. Whenever you're picking colors, it's good to, like when you're picking color combinations, you should have colors that are complementary, like the yellow and the purple are complementary, or when you're involving like tertiary colors, which is so if you have blue and you have green, blue, green would be the tertiary color. When you have those, it's good to pick 2 colors that would be next to each other, and then one that would be across. So there's a couple, or a triangle, a visual triangle is also good, which is kind of what I have going on here, a red, a purple, and a yellow. But that's just some ways that I try to pay attention to how I'm picking my colors. I knew that I really wanted to do my leaves some blue-green and some like that bright yellow-green, which is like my go-to. I mean, I have green markers, like just the G's, but I almost never use them. But here I'm doing the same thing. I'm just going out from the center, from lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest, and then we're going to move on to the leaves. So here's those yellow greens that I was talking about. These are like my go-to for my yellow greens. And this is just something that, even though there isn't any quote-unquote yellow green in the background, mixing those blue greens and the yellows did kind of create some of those shades in my faux watercoloring. So for the leaves, they're coming out from behind the flowers. So there's going to be shading where the flowers sit on top. And then I decided that I was going to shade them, make the center the darkest. So these have a distinct shape that the leaves are falling down. So you want to make sure that when you're coloring and you're doing your flicking, you're rounding your strokes just like that leaf is. It's very rounded to the outside, and that's just going to give you a much better it's just going to, the coloring is just going to look much better, because that's the way that it was intended to be colored. If you just went straight out to the sides, it's just going to look awkward. One of these days, I swear, I'm gonna do a comparison so you guys can see what I'm talking about, because I'm not entirely sure it always makes sense when I'm saying follow the shape. But from, the lightest to darkest, darkest back out to the lightest, I'll say that probably like 16 more times until you're all just like, oh my gosh, Kelly, I can't even anymore. So there's the yellow-green flowers, and then I'm going to bring in the blue-green. And I decided that I was going to put these with the roses. Not that there's much leaf to see, but there are some there. And this BG11 is one of the colors that I used in the background. And after I was done coloring it, I'm doing the same thing, because those roses are on top, the leaf is from behind, or the leaves are coming out from behind it. There's going to be much more shading. It's going to be a darker leaf because there's not very much to it, and a lot of it is underneath that rose. So once I get out to the blending, I realized that it was almost exactly the same color as what was in my background, which I didn't like. So I'm going to bring in a GO2, which is almost like the same color as like cracked pistachio from Distress Inks, and I just put that right over top. It didn't undo any of my shading, but it made it stand out from the background enough. Now that my coloring's done, I'm going to do some white gel pen highlights on my leaves, and then I also did dots in the center of my main flower. And then I always like to outline everything, because I feel like it makes the colors really pop, especially if you have a busier background going on like I do. So I'm using a writing pen, and I'm going to outline everything there. And then I decided that I didn't love it. I just didn't. So I'm going to cut it out. And thankfully, all of these images are packed pretty tightly, so it wasn't too hard to fussy cut out. That's what worked for me. I had, this is craft foam, white fun foam, and so I'm going to trace that edge there and then cut it out on the inside of the pencil line so that it will fit perfectly onto my piece and everything will have foam behind it. I had a piece of striped paper. It wasn't striped paper. I had practiced stamping some stripes in black, and I had that laying on my desk. And as I was messing around with this and I realized that I didn't love it, I don't know about you guys, but I frequently pick up the scraps that are on my desk and see if I have anything that I already made or cut or colored or whatever that will work with what I want. This actually totally worked perfectly, and I ended up loving it. This is why you don't clean off your desk, folks. Don't do it. Don't clean it off. Leave it a mess. You'll find a little gem, diamond in the rough there. So I did end up adhering that to the black and white striped paper, and I really loved the way that looked. I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment directly into the center at the top. And I love this sentiment so much. And it is set, it's just absolutely perfect for this card, because I did have some struggles with trying to figure out something that I loved. And it says, it's perfectly okay to be imperfect. And it totally is. It's totally okay to be imperfect. So if you're struggling, or you feel like your cards aren't enough, or that it's not something that you love, it's okay. Keep playing with it. I'm sure that you're making beautiful things. And even if you aren't, you're having fun while you're doing it. So that's really the point. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.